Before the exercise, Chris was ambivalent about Guantanamo Bay. Now he's clear.
The idea that we could put someone in Guantanamo indefinitely is, I think, inhuman. And having been through a mild simulation of that, the idea of that without end really terrifies me. And it completely torpedoes the sort of presumption of innocence versus guilt, because by the time they try you, you're going to be insane. I mean, you really are. And for that reason alone, I think Guantanamo, even if we use it only for the most evil of evil, I now have very serious reservations about it.
But despite their non-POW status, the US government insists that they are treated within the spirit of international law.
And what's taking place down there is responsible, it's humane, it's legal, it's proper, it's consistent with the Geneva Conventions.
2 days later, you were in American custody. You'd been sold by the Northern Alliance.
I've been kidnapped by the Americans.
The Northern Alliance sold you to the US?
Yeah, sold me, and then they kidnapped me. It wasn't official. Nothing was official about how we've been handed over to the Americans. Even though I was, at that time, I was really looking at them and like, hey, I'm not the bad guy, Yes, I'm here, but you will hear my story very soon and you will know I have nothing to do with anything.
Only 4 of the original 7 volunteers have lasted to the end of the exercise.
Gentlemen, for you, the exercise is over.
The 540 prisoners who remain incarcerated at Guantanamo Bay have no way out. And having experienced just 48 hours of treatment mild in comparison, our volunteers are clear about the devastating effect on the real detainees.
We are tired.
13 years inside Guantanamo has not silenced the Saudi national and British resident. An American documentary team recorded him through a cell door.
You cannot walk not even half a meter without being chained. Is that a human being? That's a treatment of an animal.
Neither has the years of incarceration diminished his children's efforts to campaign here for his release.
You haven't got any evidence that my father's done anything wrong and that he should be released as soon as possible.
He is the last Briton still in US captivity. He was seized in Afghanistan in 2002 by bounty hunters, suspected, the US said, of fighting for the Taliban. But since then, he's never been put on trial or answered in any court to any charges.
Shakar Amar is a torture victim, pure and simple. He was first tortured in Bagram, where he witnessed appalling things and was beaten up himself. Then he was taken to Guantanamo Bay, where he went through brutal treatment as well. Beatings, stress positions, temperature extremes, terrible force feeding when he went on a hunger strike to protest his indefinite detention.
With the sensory deprivation, I did start to see a couple of Disney characters, which scared me a little bit that I might be starting to hallucinate. And if that's only within sort of 1.5 to 2.5 days, what the effects of long-term incarceration under those conditions will do to people, God only knows.
I'm sure there's people that admit to something that they haven't really done at all. They may well have been completely innocent and have thrown their hands up to something that they have nothing to do with whatsoever.
The interrogators would be going and they'd be saying, just tell me the truth, tell me the truth, tell me the truth, I'll make it all better. And they'd like, give me some information. And of course, I didn't have any information. And many times, I mean, it wasn't even tempting to make something up, even maybe to the extent of implicating one of the other people just to get out. That was very tempting.
So is what's happening at Guantanamo justified in the war on terror?
Four months ago, concerted pressure was put on the US government to release the 48-year-old captive. A delegation of MPs, including the now Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn, travelled to Washington for talks with the Obama administration.
We got a very good response, a very open doors from very senior people, senior senators, Republican and Democrat, but none of them could explain to us why he was being held. And that's really the crux of the matter. It's been this Kafkaesque situation where he's cleared by Bush and Obama, he's able to come back, there's no allegations subsisting against him at all, and so you ask, why is he still there?
Today, the US Defense Department released this statement. the Secretary of Defense has approved the transfer of Guantanamo detainee Shaka Armour, following a thorough review of his case and taking into consideration the robust security assurances that will be provided by the British government.
I believe that there are a series of things that Shaka is witness to that would be highly embarrassing for the British government and for the United States government. Shaka Armour has seen and witnessed the deaths of 3 individuals in Guantanamo who the United States have said committed suicide. Shaka Armour believes otherwise and has American soldiers who were present at the time that back up that statement.
US Congress has the last word on Guantanamo releases. It has 30 days to consider, so Shaka Armour's homecoming isn't likely to happen for another month.
14 years of being in Guantanamo Bay, what was the most difficult part of the 14 years for you?
I think it's all hard. Guantanamo, I said it many times and I'll keep saying it because for anybody, from a normal person to understand Guantanamo, it will be impossible. You can't. By Allah, nobody will imagine it. Nobody even can fathom how hard it is because that place is built on the concept of how to destroy a human being. You know, from every perspective you will ever think, you know, physically, spiritually, you know, mentally. So it's in every minute, you struggle with every little thing, you know.
And how do you cope?
You have to cope. You know, you have to struggle. You have to get the strength that I have to carry on. And alhamdulillah, thank God, some of us did succeed, and some of us they couldn't, and some of them they gone crazy. Some of them they took their own lives. Some of them they got pushed to kill themselves. Some of them they got killed. But in the end of the day, it's a horrible situation. It's unfortunately people don't understand torture. They think torture is you know, like old days, you know, somebody hanging with a chain, somebody's getting beaten up. No, it's a lot deeper than that. It's all inside here, you know. And nothing changed in Guantanamo 14 years ago or today. It's the same. It's the same. Nothing changed. And do not believe anything they say about Guantanamo. It's a beautiful, it's nice, everybody's living, and they show you a picture. The reality is, you want to tell the people it's okay in Guantanamo? Open the doors of Guantanamo. Let the people go inside there. Let all these governments, they have, you know, citizens there living in there, let them go and talk to them openly. They can't. Why? Because they know they're keeping the lid on Guantanamo, and they are minimizing the visit of the media. Why? Because they know somehow somebody's gonna discover it one day. And that's why they're making it tighter and tighter for people to visit that place, because they know they are doing horrible things. If I'm hiding something, you know, definitely there is something wrong.
What would you say to the United States of America? What's your message?
My message to the people actually is really they need to stand up for that. They need to stand up and come out and try to help to close that place, because, you know, bringing justice to Guantanamo is not for individuals, it's for themselves also. Today Guantanamo in the Caribbean, tomorrow Guantanamo is going to be in the mainland. As they all know, not long ago, there is nobody can be locked up without any trial or anything. Now there is people in America, they are locked up without any trials. And that's why, you know, whatever happening to us in Guantanamo, it can happen inside America. And that's why they have to stop it from happening. And the only thing they have to do is to come out and close Guantanamo, shout to close Guantanamo, say they know. It's not gonna be again another Guantanamo inside America. People should be going from Guantanamo outside to their families. Not go back to the mainland, because it's just going to be another Guantanamo in America, and we don't want that. That's not justice. Justice is to free people or to try them if they've done something wrong. But we all knowing that nobody done nothing, you know, nothing wrong, just like me. 14 years of being accused of everything, the worst of the worst. Yet, in the end of the day, without any whatsoever, you know, accusation that I came, and I'm free, completely free out here, without any restriction.
been like to reintegrate into society here?
It's beautiful. It's beautiful. I used to live here before I went to Afghanistan, and now I'm back again to the same society where I used to live.
The final British resident held at Guantanamo Bay, Shaker Amer, has said 14 years of pain were washed away in joys and tears the moment he was reunited with his wife. 48-year-old Amer returned to the UK in late October, freed from the U.S. military facility in Cuba, where he had been held without trial. Even when the plane was in the air, he feared it was a trick that would end in his being imprisoned again in some other country, such as Saudi Arabia. In a broad-ranging interview with the Mail on Sunday, the father of four spoke about the joy and apprehension of being reunited with his family, the strangeness of trying to get used to everyday domestic life again, and delivered a blunt message for extremists living in the UK to, quote, "get the hell out."
A lot of the prisoners that remain right now in Guantanamo Bay are from countries like Yemen and like Saudi Arabia. What's it going to be like for them reintegrating into society?
Truly, I believe I had an interview and I've been asked about the same thing, you know. It's very sad to say Americans, they are so keen to send people far away from their countries, far away from the region where they live. And they sent few people to Ghana, in the middle of Africa. They sent two brothers, which is, I know them. Their families, they live in Mecca. I mean, the brother is born in Mecca, and his wife and his kids and his mother. I mean, how you want that man to go to live a normal life? And he's living in Ghana, in a different culture, different language, different everything, while his family is back in Saudi Arabia. That's why they should send people, if they cannot send them back to Yemen, send them close to their countries so they can go back to their families and they can see them and they can go and live normal life. Indeed, these guys, they're going to try to go back to their families, because what does it mean after 14 years you put me somewhere far away that I cannot see my family? Indeed, I'm going to try to run away to rejoin my wife and my kids. And then Americans, they said, look at them, they ran away. Indeed, they will run away. They want to go back to their wives and their kids and their families. And that's an excuse for the American to say, look at them, they're going to join the war. But actually they are not. They're going to join their family. So I advise the American government to send them closer to their countries, somewhere where they can be reunited with their families, so they can feel happy to be back again. Not otherwise.
How did you feel the moment you left Guantanamo Bay?
You know, I didn't believe it until I landed in this country, truly, because they got, as I say, they overwhelmed us with a tsunami of lies, that even though I was in the plane with the Metropolitan, with another, still I said it could be a trick, it could be a trick. You know, wait, until I landed. When I landed and I saw, oh yeah, this is it, this is England, you know. Then I said, Alhamdulillah, thank God, you know, I'm back.
The first test is a practical one. What is the quality of the intelligence extracted? The US government says it has saved lives, but there is no independent evidence to support that claim. Indeed, some British detainees have signed confessions in Guantanamo which were later proven to be false. But the bigger issue is a moral one. Do the practices at Guantanamo betray the very values the West claims to be defending? Liberty, democracy, the rule of law, and above all, humanity.
We have a moral United States that has held a British citizen, Shaker Amer, in Guantanamo Bay for 13 years without charge or trial, an innocent man taken from his family and his children, a man denied seeing his children grow up after he was taken into captivity by these psychopaths. We have children, his children, who've been denied a father in their childhood by a nation, a government representing a nation, more like it, and even more so, a hidden hand behind governments, whichever the complexion, that are driving this horrific treatment of people. We have an American administration, under whatever colour, that can do that to a human being. and still claim the moral high ground.
Let's talk about standards. You were a senior official in the Joint Special Operations Command at that time, JSOC, which is the kind of elite, top secret unit responsible for the killing of Osama bin Laden, among other things. You've been described as the father of the modern JSOC. And you mentioned Camp Bucker and Camp Cropper, and you mentioned standards. You didn't mention Camp Nama in Iraq, which was nicknamed Nasty Ass Military Area, and where, according to a New York Times investigation, US interrogators beat prisoners with rifle butts, spat in their faces, and used them for target practice in a game of paintball, where the motto was no blood, no foul, meaning interrogators couldn't be prosecuted if a detainee didn't visibly bleed.
Suddenly I hear the chopper landing and then screams in English, that was the most beautiful thing I hear at that time, because it was English.
An American English?
American English.
What were they saying?
They said, move it, let's go. And then I've seen people with guns and all that, with helmets and everything, just like a movie. And they're just running around and all that, covering the whole area with their guns and all that, and each one of them with a gun in my head. And I was like, I'm all right now, because these are Americans, at least I can talk to them. They're not going to do anything horrible. Truly, that's exactly, I said, that's it. I got to safety, finally.
So you're glad to
to
hear the American
I was happy.
voices.
I was not just glad, I was smiling all the way. They start beating with the sticks on the ground, which is a very loud noise. And they said, you have to comply with orders, or otherwise we're going to beat the hell out of you. And I was like, okay.
Tell me but physically, how were you treated there?
With every sense of the meaning, torture. It's a pure torture. I've been kept for 9 days awake. I was standing 18 hours a day. There was all kind of things, from freezing you, throwing freezing water in your head while you are standing on a concrete, freezing cold, 20 below zero, with the hedgehog ties, which is they tie your hands and your legs together, and you cannot relax because your hands behind your back, with all the beating which happened in hitting my head against the wall, which has happened once, not more than once, because it was the real interrogation time when they were like trying to break me down, and they did that.
Tell me about the interrogations at Bagram, because you have made allegations that there were British intelligence officers present.
Yeah, I don't think even the British themselves, they will deny that they were there. I don't think they will deny they were there. And they know I was going through torture. They know all that, because when I left here, I weighed 250 pounds. When I saw John, the British guy, the first thing he said to me, you look like a ghost. And I'm sure if he's watching this, he will remember that.
You're talking directly to an intelligence officer, allegedly.
Yes, my name's John.
Are you telling me, A, those are standards you're proud of, and B, that didn't help in the rise of ISIL?
No, obviously no. Those are not standards. They're not standards that I will ever be proud of. And my role, my personal role, when you say the father of, whatever, what I was asked to do, and this was post Abu Ghraib, so I was responsible for training interrogators.
Who then went and abused these Iraqis.
Who then went in. So we saw what was happening, but it's not the training that we were giving these people.
After Bagram, you were moved to Kandahar in Afghanistan. Did the same treatment continue?
Actually, it's worse. It's a lot worse.
In what way?
First of all, when I get to Kandahar, they have something called welcoming party, where they really beat you up so bad while you are still on the concrete on the airport, before even they move you to the, check you and process your case and know who you are, and which it did not happen. The same thing like in Bagram, where they put you in a square. But that's it. They put you in a square, they talk to you, and then after that they beat you something to wear, and then they put you in a cage. In Kandahar, it wasn't like that. It was totally beating up the kids there. I call them kids because they were kids. They were all young, and they've been brainwashed big time. And
these are US soldiers?
Yes. And they were given the right to do anything they want. And that's, you're talking about 25 of us that shipment was like 25 people in there. And we all just laying face down at 2 o'clock in the morning. And all what happened is just beating up with the M16, jumping on your back, you know, kick your head with their boots and all that. And they carry doing it all the way until the time come when they bring you inside, which is sometime early in the morning. Some of us went early, you know, in the beginning. For me, I got a good share of the beating because I was from the last one who's entered the tent to be processed. Plus, I spoke good English, which has made it horrible on me because there was a guy laying next to me and they were doing horrible things to him with the M16.
What, can I ask what?
You know, they're trying to shove the M16 behind in his backside. And the guy is screaming. He said, I'm not a woman, I'm not a woman. Why are you doing this to me? Why are you trying to do this? And he was so sad, he was so upsetting. And I wasn't laying down and then I said, you know, I have to do something, you know. So I start speaking in English. I said, guys, please, you know, this guy is saying this to you, this guy. And as soon as they hear me speaking in American accent English, straight away they all lift what they have in their hand and they just came back to me. And they start shouting, he's a traitor, he's a traitor. And I just had it, left and right, left and right. In fact, it's documented it. As soon as I arrived in Guantanamo, my kidney was bleeding. And it's been documented in my medical file. And I thought I will never live that day. Until a black woman, she was sitting and I can hear her talking, but not trying to show that she have any sympathy. She said, oh, come on, guys, please, he had enough. Come on, guys, you know, just give him a little bit of time. Come on, you've been, you know, beating him so much. And I felt that woman, she feels sorry for me, but she doesn't want to show that to them because, you know, I'm supposed to be the bad guy.
When we saw what was happening inside of the whole Abu Ghraib scandal, my role, and it was July of 2004, I was asked to come in and basically fix that problem. We shut that place down as fast as I could.
Listen to the verdict of Human Rights Watch in their report on Camp Nama. Yeah. Military intelligence battalions systematized the use of abusive techniques in Iraq in 2003-04, and military intelligence interrogators, including officers, are implicated in widespread abuses during that time.
Yeah.
How can you say you don't have any responsibility for what
those
interrogators
did? I always feel like I have responsibility. I'm not going to sit here and tell you I don't have responsibility. We all have responsibility, but
you didn't tell them to do what they did.
No, they're not trained. They weren't trained to do that.
So what did they do?
This is poor leadership at its finest, if that's appropriate to say. There was no accountability at that time.
What accountability did you bring in general?
Accountability was to shut it down and to standardize it.
Human Rights Watch says that Red Cross was blocked from Camp Nama.
From Camp Nama.
Why?
You'll have to ask the folks that ran Camp Nama.
You were one of the commanding officers who turned up to clean it up?
I was the one that shut it down. I was the one that helped shut it down.
Did you call for Red Cross to be allowed in internal conversations?
We did. Eventually, we did.
Human Rights Watch says there are few indications the military undertook any systematic efforts
not in Camp Nama,
to investigate and prosecute abuses.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
What would you say to those who are in charge of the British government at the time? What do you think of them in the light of what you experienced there?
I really don't think it's a British thing. I don't think it's got nothing to do with England or with Britain. I think it's all about America at that time. Everybody was scared. Everybody was doing what America wants them to do regardless. And some of the British intelligence service, they told me that openly. They said it's not in our hands, Shakir.
And yet they were there and they saw it happen.
Yes. Another person by a name, John also, which is amazing. They all use that John because it's so common. He said, we know what they are doing to you. But I promise you one thing, Shakir. When you come back to England, you will know we are not like them.
Were you abandoned by the British there?
You know, I cannot say, truly I cannot say I've been abandoned, you know, because I wasn't a British citizen.
But you were a British resident,
I was a resident. And the only thing I was hoped for is really to tell them, listen, man, this is not the guy you are looking for, so you want to really hand him over to us? I believe intelligence service, they are a government into a government. This is what this is my own, you know, conclusion when I see what happened with these intelligence service all over the world. They are not really obliged to follow what the government do.
What needs to be done to get to the bottom of this?
To be clearly on this issue, I believe nobody should be prosecuted because of what happened in the past, especially if we try to prevent it from happening in the future.
Even though you were tortured, Shaka, and even though British intelligence agencies, you allege, were present, nobody should be prosecuted?
No. I promise you, even the guys who done it to me, I don't think they should go through it.
Why not? Why not? Surely it has to send a message out.
Because the message now is we need to prevent it from happening again.
Should there be an inquiry then into the intelligence services in this country?
Indeed, definitely. Because for you to understand what happened, to know the truth, you have to inquire. You have to ask questions.
So a full public inquiry into the activities of the British intelligence services.
I believe in that, and I told him this is the best thing you can do. But like again, for the reason to know, and we don't need to know all of us, but definitely the government has to know what's the role, and they have to stop it.
And should people like Tony Blair, Jack Straw be called before that inquiry, in your view?
Indeed, definitely, because they are the most one who knows exactly what happened.
Human Rights Watch says there were few indications the military undertook any systematic efforts to investigate or prosecute abuses.
That's not true. There were individuals in Iraq and in Afghanistan that came under investigation, and many were found, those investigations were found substantiated, and those individuals were punished.
How many interrogators from Camp Nama were prosecuted in a court of law?
I don't know. I don't
Any?
know. I don't,
because internal punishments don't really count, though, do they?
Yeah, I don't know. I think that our entire system is guilty. I think our entire system at that time was guilty. It was guilty of just totally inappropriate behavior on the part of what we accept.
Doesn't US law and international law say that if you commit torture, you should be prosecuted in a court? You don't just get a slap on the wrist. So why haven't more people been prosecuted in court?
I mean, you'd have to. I hope that as more and more information comes out, that people are held accountable.
You have that information in your head, presumably. You went there and you shut it down.
I know the ones that I was aware of, which was quite a few.
Let's talk about what you are aware of. You're on record as saying that you yourself physically interrogated detainees, that you've been, quote, personally involved in thousands of interrogation operations. Just to clarify, did those interrogations that you were involved in, General, ever involve torture?
No.
And when we say torture, are we both agreeing on the definition of torture?
Every single one that I was involved in, I have no problems with.
No waterboarding?
None of that. None of that.
No beatings, no sleep deprivation?
Nope.
None of that stuff?
Nope.
None of the stuff we've heard about all those abuses?
Nope. That's right.
The reason I ask is...
if I was asked to do anything, Mehdi, I was asked to take the standards that we were training and take the new doctrine that came out and get this thing under control. Again, history is not going to look kind on those actions that you're describing right now, and we should be held accountable for many, many years to come.
Whether it's interrogations or drone strikes or assassinations or renditions or night raids or whatever it is, do you believe that your work in that so-called shadow war resulted in America being more secure today than it was after 9/11? Because 14 years after 9/11, all the war on terror seems to have given us is more war and more terror.
I think that we have invested in more conflict instead of actually investing in solutions. There are elements within this organization that the only way to deal with them is they either have to be captured and put away in some legitimate prison system that will actually hold them for a short period of time.
Not Camp Nama, we hope.
Or they will have to be killed. I mean, that's a component of a much broader strategy. The military has to be like a lowercase m. I mean, it is so indecisive. It is not the piece that is going to win the day. There has to be other components of a strategy, and I don't see them. I see us making the military component the principal effort from our perspective, and I just don't see any other real strong informational, diplomatic, or primarily economic component to this thing. And frankly, the region needs to come to the table and say, this is how we believe we can end this thing.
You say the region needs to come to the table, and yet you talk about the kind of failures of the military side. I'm asking about the role you played. You were JSOC, which did this quote-unquote shadow war.
So you keep saying Camp Nama, but we closed Camp Nama down.
You closed Camp Nama, but then you
like
did.
I said,
but then you did renditions. You did drone strikes. You did night raids.
That was not my responsibility, and I hate to say it like that.
JSOC wasn't responsible for any drone strikes, really?
Well, for drone strikes,
which have been hugely counterproductive on the counter-terrorist front.
Yeah.
Many analysts have argued they've created...
is a different issue.
But the drone strikes, many would argue...
That's another show for you.
Well, maybe another show, but the drone strikes, for example, many have argued they create more terrorists than they kill. The night raids in Afghanistan, many have argued they create more terrorists than they get.
I don't disagree with that. I think that that's conflict. When you invest in conflict,
with respect,
so
General,
when you
that's
drop
your
a bomb,
failure then, isn't it?
When you drop a bomb from a drone, you're investing, you are going to cause more damage than you're going to cause good. And I think that...
So do you think President Obama should be not ramping up drone strikes, as he has done, but actually ramping them down, as his predecessor did?
I think that there should be a different approach, absolutely.
And so I think on the one hand, non-Muslims cannot stereotype, but I also think the Muslim community has to think about how the Muslim community has to think about how we make sure that children are not being infected with this twisted notion that somehow they can kill innocent people, and that is justified by religion.
I do believe, though, Mehdi, that there are individuals that they believe in perpetual conflict on these Islamic radical front, so to speak. So they've talked about perpetuating conflict for the rest of time. I mean, some of these guys have written about it. So we have to understand that.
And mutual accusations.
Iranian authorities failed.
Iran and the United States have reached a nuclear agreement. While the deal-makers believe the plan will prevent Iran from building a nuclear bomb, its critics have branded it a calamity.
The other Sunni Arab nations will not sit by and watch Iran acquire nuclear weapons.
So is it a fresh start or a fatal mistake?
Stop Iran now! Reject this deal!
And can old foes ever become real friends?
This deal is not built on trust. It is built on verification.
The hostility goes back more than 60 years and was triggered by oil.
Today is December 4th, 2015. In today's video, you'll learn why if oil prices stay where they are today, at these multi-decade lows, somebody's going to drop a bomb. And I'm not joking. I'm not kidding you. Because countries like Russia are being bankrupted by the cartel that makes up Saudi Arabia. I mean, OPEC doesn't really even exist. It's just Saudi Arabia in cahoots with the United States. And although the mainstream media will call this a conspiracy, that Saudi Arabia would get together with its trusted ally, the United States, and vice versa, to bankrupt a known enemy in this fight, which has now been dubbed, at least in my opinion, the new Cold War, isn't a conspiracy at all. It's part of the stratagem, the strategy that makes up this geopolitical conflict today. So if oil prices continue to be battered to these multi-decade lows, we're now retesting the lows sub $40 a barrel, depending on whether or not you're looking at Brent or WTI. Russia's going to drop a bomb, potentially. Iran's going to drop a bomb, potentially. Venezuela, which is experiencing hyperinflation right now, is going to drop a bomb, potentially. Or one of the terrorist arms of one of these countries or member nations is going to drop a friggin' bomb. Because again, all these countries rely on oil prices above $70 a barrel on average. Countries like Venezuela, I believe it's even higher than that. It's over like $100 a barrel. Same thing with Iran, because they use these oil prices, high oil prices, and the break-even point of, let's say, roughly $70 a barrel to subsidize their entire economy. Same thing with Saudi Arabia. In fact, Saudi Arabia is feeling the pinch right now too. They're borrowing, they're taking on debt because they have access to credit markets. But if oil prices stay at these multi-decade lows for, let's say, the next 5 to 10 years, Saudi Arabia will be bankrupt itself. So all of this plays into the geopolitical war. That's why we hear all this talk about nuclear weapons right now. And it's not just coming from the alternative media anymore. In fact, there's a representative, a congresswoman, a very smart lady, a Democrat, who sounds like a conservative to me. I believe her name is Tulsi, if we're pronouncing it correctly, Tulsi Gabbard. She's a congresswoman out of Hawaii. Suggested that the events transpiring and being pushed by the Barack Obama administration, and this is a Democrat, I'm paraphrasing a little bit, could lead potentially to World War III in a nuclear event.
Let's talk about this deal, this agreement that was worked out today between the United States and Russia to avoid some accidental head-on collision between fighter jets over Syria. The secrecy of this deal, they're not making it public. Does that concern you?
It doesn't. You know, I think that the Pentagon knows and understands how important it is to make sure that our troops are not put into harm's way and that we're not put into a situation where you have this accidental military conflict with Russia in the air. So I think making this deal with Russia to deconflict that is an important thing. But there's a bigger issue here that I'm concerned with, and that is the fact that the U.S. and the CIA are working to overthrow the Syrian government of Assad, while Russia, a longtime ally of Assad for decades now, is working to defend or uphold this Syrian government of Assad. And this puts us in a position of a possible direct head-to-head conflict with Russia as long as the U.S. and CIA continue down this path.
Well, how does the U.S. and Russia avoid that head-on contact? Because you're absolutely right. The U.S. wants to get rid of Bashar al-Assad. The Russians want to boost him and protect him together with the Iranians, their allies, the Lebanese Hezbollah group. They're trying to prop him up. So how do you avoid that potential collision?
Very simple. The U.S. and the CIA should stop this illegal and counterproductive war to overthrow the Syrian government of Assad and should stay focused on fighting against who our enemy is, the Islamic extremist groups. Because right now we're seeing why this is counterproductive. By working towards that end, by working towards overthrowing the Syrian government of Assad, we are not only strengthening our enemy, the Islamic extremists, who will walk in and take over all of the country of Syria. Right now they have about half of the country under their control, but it also puts us in that position of a potential direct head-to-head conflict with Russia, which brings us to the brink of a potential larger conflict of a World War III type situation.
Again, in these countries that are suffering the consequences of this conspiracy, and it's exactly what it is, driving oil prices into the gutter to these multi-decade lows. I mean, remember, let's step back here for a minute. There was peak oil just about a year or two ago. Remember peak oil theory? There wasn't enough oil. We were running out. That's what justified oil prices above $100 a barrel for that extended period of time. Now there's too much, they say. Now Saudi Arabia is flooding the market, they say. Well, that should prove to you in and of itself this is entirely an artificial market, that Saudi Arabia and the non-OPEC cartel, which is being fragmented right now because of the draconian actions of Saudi Arabia, controls that supply and demand. It's not a real market. It's totally and entirely artificial. They can move that ball of yarn like a cat any which way they want. It's the same reason why today the Dow Jones is up a record 350 points. And again, I've spoken about this in countless videos. I actually think Dow 20,000 is a possibility before the ultimate crash. I think that they'll stoke the market even higher. But at the same time that's happening, oil is still crashing. Companies in the oil and gas sector are being beaten up by the hedge funds and high-frequency traders that basically just have a big short on oil. We've seen this trade for some time now. It was long tech, short oil and gas and natural gas. That's exactly what's been happening. But I see this trade unraveling. It's kind of like a rubber band being wound really tightly and then it just springs very violently. And we saw this coming from comments from Mario Draghi yesterday, who basically didn't give the money whores on Wall Street enough of what they were looking for. In fact, he's going to continue the quantitative easing policies of the ECB, similarly to what we see here in the United States. And I believe they still cut rates even further into negative territory. But it wasn't enough for the money whores that run Wall Street today. You know, the Wall Street hedge funds and the HFT high-frequency traders, that the dollar trade, the long dollar, short euro trade unraveled. So the euro actually moved violently to the upside yesterday, and the dollar moved violently to the downside. You see how easy it is for this tightly wound rubber band to go the other direction? And I think it's what's happening now. I think fundamentally there's this macro shift occurring in the market. So it's really a question of when. Either oil prices will work their way back up to a normalized range, let's say 65 or 75 bucks a barrel, or if it continues to be artificially suppressed through this conspiracy that makes up the Saudi Arabian cartel, it's not even OPEC anymore, that's essentially been destroyed, in cahoots with the United States to put pressure on its enemies, enemy nations like Russia and Iran. It'll eventually, if oil prices don't rise themselves and something doesn't change, it'll eventually result in a bomb going off. Somebody's going to drop a friggin' bomb. And again, it's not just the alternative media talking about this. The threat of nuclear warfare is far greater today than it has been arguably in any time in history, not since the last great Cold War or World War I or even World War II, as they were developing a lot of these nuclear capabilities and weapons. This is going to happen. I'm not even kidding you. I'm not joking. This is going to happen in the not too distant future. If you continue to see oil prices, and when I look at this, I not only see it just from a practical standpoint, as I see it as an investment opportunity because we're at these macro artificial lows, but it also makes me extremely nervous because I know the longer oil prices stay this low, it only increases the likelihood for a bomb to go off. And at the very least, Vladimir Putin is going to start lighting up, which he's already been doing, by the way, lighting up the oil fields which make up the greater Syria and Iraq area that they call the Levant, where ISIS is trying to establish its caliphate on the heels of a engineered campaign that's been launched by the West. Again, the United States, its Western allies, Israel, of course, promoting the creation of these Islamic radicals, which have now become ISIS, which really just sprung from Al-Qaeda, which used to be, prior to Al-Qaeda being an enemy of the United States, was actually supported and funded by the CIA itself. Remember, Osama bin Laden actually worked with the United States federal government and U.S. intelligence when he was fighting the Soviets in Iraq. Again, we build the terrorists up, then we justify the war and we tear them down. We build the terrorists up, then we tear them down. We build people up like Saddam Hussein, then we tear them down. We build people up like Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi, then we assassinate them indirectly through NATO and we tear them down. That's what the United States of America does. Low oil prices will start World War III. Watch the economic fundamental shifts occurring right now. It's why there's violent trading going on in the currency markets. It's why the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, finally gave in and added the Chinese renminbi, the yuan, to its world reserve currency, part of the special drawing rights that makes up the basket at the IMF. This is all building to war. The East versus the West. Mainstream media is going to paint this as a dichotomy of black and white, good versus evil. It's going to paint the United States as good. It's going to paint Russia as evil, China as evil, so that they can justify and foster and catalyze the war they intended from the very beginning. Again, none of this should be a surprise. This has been building up for decades now. This is exactly the strategy that Western governments and U.S. intelligence has had in place for some time now. And it's exactly why they're acting in cahoots, the United States and Saudi Arabia, to drive oil prices into the doldrums. It's not just to take out U.S. fracking companies. That's not the only goal. They're killing two birds with one stone. The real goal is to put pressure on Russia and its ally China and countries like Iran and enemies of the United States as we fight this new Cold War.
Flanked by the great land masses of Asia and Africa lies the ancient kingdom of Persia.
In 1953, Washington and London orchestrated a coup to overthrow the elected Prime Minister of Iran, Mohammad Mossadegh, who had nationalized the then British-controlled oil industry.
Can mutual understanding solve the present crisis, preserving for mankind oil from the wells of Persia?
In his place, the US propped up the Shah, whose corrupt and despotic reign bred discontent.
The royal couple were treated to the first ballet ever performed in the White House.
In 1979, the people of Iran rose up in revolution. Autocracy became theocracy. The US became the Great Satan. 52 Americans were taken hostage for 444 days when Iranian students stormed the embassy in Tehran. And the crisis prompted an end to diplomatic relations.
As we drove along the deserted main street, the extent of damage and death became clear.
In the 1980s, the rift widened when the US backed Iraq's invasion of Iran.
Your country is now helping Iraq.
With Washington's quiet acquiescence, Saddam Hussein deployed chemical weapons against Iranian forces. And to make things worse, as the war was drawing to a close, the US military shot down an Iranian passenger plane, killing all 290 civilians on board.
This man's burden was heavy, searching for the bodies of 5 of his relatives.
Decades of verbal attacks and crippling sanctions followed, while the US accused Iran of being behind Hezbollah's attacks, including the infamous bombing of a US Marine barracks in Beirut which left 241 Americans dead.
Iran remains the world's primary state sponsor of terror.
Today, Iranian mobs continue to chant death to America. But since reformist Hassan Rouhani became president in 2013, the tide has begun to turn.
You can't use war to stop a war.
On July 14, 2015, a milestone nuclear agreement was finally reached.
This deal offers an opportunity to move in a new direction.
While for many, celebration, euphoria, and hope mark the day, the question remains, is this the beginning of a new friendship, or are these two countries destined to remain the best of enemies? General, for more than 3 decades now, the US and Iran have been bitter enemies. Isn't it time now to bury the hatchet, to find some common ground, to end this kind of never-ending Cold War between your two countries?
Yeah, and I will tell you, Mehdi, for many years in the commanders that I have worked for, when I have been asked, I've been very pro. We have to do something with Iran. We have to talk to Iran in some form or fashion, but we've got to do it in a way that that also recognizes their really bad behavior over the 3+ decades, 3.5 decades that frankly the mullahs have been in charge of that country.
Whenever you speak to American officials or former officials, they talk about Iranian bad behavior, undeniable as it is.
Yeah, it's undeniable, that's right.
But when you talk to Iranians or Iranian officials, they'll say, what about American bad behavior? We never hear about America's support for the Shah, for the toppling of Mohammad Mossadegh, the Iranian Prime Minister, for the support of Saddam's invasion of Iran, the shooting down of Iranian airliner. There's enough bad behavior to go around on all sides, isn't there?
But it's not, so I'm not going to disagree with you on those issues.
Well, you can't, those are facts.
Yeah, they're facts, but it's, it's so consistent. Their bad behavior, Iran's bad behavior is so consistent, and it's so often, and it's just continuous. At some point in time, this is a country, Iran is a country that's got a well-educated society. I mean, there's so many positives and so much potential for them to contribute to the greater good of the world, yet they don't. They've decided that they're not going to do that. They've decided that they're going to be a pariah state instead of a contributing state.
They would argue they've been made a pariah state. When they were invaded by Saddam Hussein, they didn't get the support of the world. Saddam got the support of the world.
Act differently. Then change your behavior. Change your behavior.
Well, they would argue that these negotiations that we've been seeing in recent years between the Obama administration and the Iranian government is an example of changed behavior.
Get to a point where you accept your role in the world. And I think for Iran, they need to accept where they are going to be, where do they want to be in the future.
You can't have it both ways, generals. You can't say we want to isolate them with sanctions, but they've got to play a positive part in the world. You've got to pick one or the other. That's what the Obama administration's doing.
The reason why the sanctions, if you go way back, is because of bad behavior.
This track is not an attack upon the American people. It's an attack upon the system within which they live. Since 1945, the United States has attempted to overthrow more than 50 foreign governments. In the process, the US has caused the end of life for several million people and condemned many millions more to a life of agony and despair. The strength of your dreaming prevents you from reason. The American dream only makes sense if you're sleeping. It's just a cruel fantasy. Their politics took my voice away, but their music gave it back to me. The land where the lumpen are consumed by consumption, killing themselves to shovel down food in abundance. I guess a rapper from Britain is a rare voice. America is capitalism on steroids. Natives kept in casinos and reservations. Displaced slaves never given reparations. Take everything from Native Americans and wonder why I call it the racist experiment. Afraid of your melanin, the same as it's ever been. That ain't gonna change with the race of the president. I see imperialism under your skin tone. You could call it Christopher Columbus syndrome. Is it a world station or an abomination? Is it